Humans have no tolerance for machine failure and exceptional tolerance for human failure.
We've seen this with autonomous vehicles, for sure.
1.3 million people globally die on the roadways every year. About 95% a result of human error.
Someone put out a video where a girl was on her scooter and she falls out into the road, and then a autonomous vehicle went right around her. Any other person for sure would have ran this girl over. It's just a branding problem.
Let me tell you why it's not just a branding problem. Humans love control. We cannot stand the thought of a machine misbehaving in sort of any case. And the future is not determined by what machines can do, it's determined by what we want them to do. And it's going to be very hard to convince a lot of the population in this post-scarcity world that they should improve their outcomes at some risk of machine failure.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Mission Daily. I'm your host, Stephanie Postles, and today I'm super excited to be joined by Zack Kass. Zack is the former head of go-to-market at OpenAI, an AI futurist, and a top keynote speaker in this space. Zack has spent over 14 years at the forefront of artificial intelligence, helping businesses and leaders understand not just where AI is today, but where it's taking us. Zack, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Zack, you've done a lot, you're doing a lot. You're currently in China right now, you're going all over the world. But I wanted to start a question with, if I were to ask one of your closest friends or your family member, like, who is Zack? What is he doing right now? What do you think they would say about you?
It depends on who you ask. I got married 2.5 weeks ago, and we had one of the great gifts that you get when you get married, I think, is a wedding toast. And in fact, one of my best friends is Swedish, and Swedish weddings are all about toast. That is like what and it's this incredible gift that I've tried to import. And he was our Toastmaster. And so there were 10 toasts at our wedding, each beautiful and unique in their own way. But what I got was a smattering of how people from both Adley, my wife, and my lives sort of see us. And of course, hers were glowing. I was roasted, not once, not twice, but 3 times, deservingly so. But I think, it depends on who you ask. I think most people objectively would tell you that I am probably doing my best to convince as many people as I can that the pie is growing and that the world is getting more prosperous and more abundant. That is my mission. I think most people would align with that. And then the path to get there, is one part Fortune 1000 advisory, one part speaking, keynoting, one part research and content. And, if depending on who you ask, they would trickle in, he is full of charm and sarcasm and wit on a good day, and anxiety, crippling neurotic anxiety on another. But, that's just life, I suppose.
I love that. Well, congratulations for being newly married. I love that. It was a perfect question to know how people were toasting to you. Super fun. So how did you get into this space? I mean, being called an AI futurist, that means you have to know your shit. So how did you get into this space? Why are you so passionate about this?
First of all, I will say on the title, it is actually a title that I sort of laugh at. We use it primarily, and I'm sort of honest about this now, it basically someone started using it to sell tickets because we didn't know how else to describe me. I didn't want to just be the former head of go-to-market at OpenAI. And now I have roles. Now I have a couple academic roles, actually. And now we actually are starting to use the title CEO of ZKAI Advisory, which is our global advisory firm. The term futurist was originally designed to basically tell people when they were coming to a talk, we're going to talk about the future. This person wants to tell you what's coming. I will admit, I think of all the things that we do from a branding and marketing standpoint, it's probably the silliest, but it does describe what we are trying to do. I got into the category 16 years ago when I joined a company called Crowdflower, then became Figure 8 and was sold to App. And it was one of the early human labeled at scale machine data labeling services. And what I learned then was how hard it was to build complex and good AI systems, which is why so few companies were doing it, but how exciting it was when you could. And so we got to work with early successful AI companies, primarily Facebook, Amazon, Google, a few others who were just doing this really well at scale. And there was always this idea, like, if we could actually democratize this, if everyone could do this, man, things would get really exciting really fast, and stuck around the category long enough for that to actually happen.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Well, I have listened to some of your talks and speeches, and I do think you have a lot of very interesting points, which we'll get into, about like what the future could look like. And oftentimes when I hear people talk about it, things like that, I'm like, yeah, whatever. Okay, that's just like your thought, and here's your background, and here's why you're pushing that. But you had a lot of compelling thoughts, which we will get into. So I want to kind of start with, you have spoken about societal thresholds, technological thresholds. And first, I'd love for you to like define what is that, and then go through kind of a timeline of like, where have we been? Where are we going?
Well, first, I'm glad you're starting with this. This is, of all the things that I talk about, this is probably my favorite to talk and think about. And it's a novel concept that we're researching now that most people still aren't thinking about. And the reason that most people don't think about societal thresholds and technological thresholds, and I'll define them in a second, is because, in fact, they haven't mattered historically. So a technological threshold asks the question, what can a machine do? And a societal threshold asks the question, what do we want a machine to do? What are we willing to let it do? And for most of human history, they converged. They operated in tandem, such that when we discovered things, often, by the way, out of necessity, we immediately adopted or implemented them. There was very little in the way of actually societally adopting something outside, of course, the cost of adopting that thing. But that's actually a function of the technological threshold itself. And the reason for this is because we saw these inventions as necessity, as a way to just live a day longer. And there are plenty of them. And then at some point, we start to move into this post-barbarism world, sort of this post-scarcity world, where we start to see technological discoveries, inventions, which are increasingly driven by a military-industrial complex and a university system that's sort of rapidly advancing, right? The state of innovation. We start seeing these things as luxuries. And very recently, there's been this incredible divergence between technological thresholds and societal thresholds. And there are many things that machines can do that we choose not to have them do. My favorite, I think the principal example is nuclear power, right? We discovered nuclear energy in the 50s, right? And, started implementing it in the 70s, and then basically made it illegal in the 80s and 90s in countries like the US and Germany, of course, because of the, potential disaster consequences, the downside consequences. We saw it as a luxury. We said, we have enough coal, let's back burner nuclear power. And of course, that was a bad decision. And there are many such examples. I've become fascinated by the AI societal thresholds. How and why does an AI societal threshold move? And that's now where we spend a bunch of time doing research, writing, and talking.
Got it. So when thinking about the AI societal threshold, like, where are we now? Because it feels like the past couple years, I mean, I know a lot of these things have been getting worked on for a long time, but there was a certain point when all of a sudden usage started happening from mainstream people, not just like researchers and labs. So like, where are we at currently, and where do you think it's heading?
Well, it's important to remember that AI societal thresholds aren't actually just one big group. Societal thresholds operate sort of individually, and there are plenty of examples in AI where we've invented something and adopted it instantly. And most of these things are sort of high fidelity, low latency consumer products like DALL-E, Sora, et cetera, where you can get this immediate return, and so you do this thing. Then there are more complex changes that need to take place, and sort of more complex behavioral changes that need to happen, where the AI can actually start to feel a little more invasive. And an obvious example of this is, the Google Home or Amazon Echoes, where we put things in our home and started talking to them, and then people are like, what? Actually, I don't really. The usage of these machines has actually quite declined, and it's not just because people don't think that they work that well. They actually work okay. It's because people are like, you know what? I don't actually really want this thing listening to me. I don't want to. A lot of people disabled Siri. It's like we started to feel like there was like this invasiveness. Even if there is some convenience, we don't want it. And there are increasing numbers of examples around this. And I think my favorite example now is the autonomous vehicle. So if you take ChatGPT as sort of one of these extreme fast adoption products, autonomous vehicles is like it's going to be one of these extremely low adoption products. And the reason for that, I think, is not that the infrastructure doesn't exist and it's not that the laws aren't there. It's that they are just incredibly unpopular. And the tail wags the dog in this case. If politicians were getting unelected because they were blocking autonomous vehicle policy, or if they were getting elected to pass autonomous vehicle policy, we would have it, right? Like we could move fast in this direction. We just aren't, and we don't. And again, there are a few reasons for this that we can get into, but it's important to remember that sort of we're seeing these things happen now, not just as AI, but in sort of products and categories.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up autonomous vehicles. The other day, so I live in Austin, and someone put out a video where a girl was on her scooter and she was driving across the Congress Bridge or something, and she falls out into the road, and then a autonomous vehicle that didn't have a driver in it went right around her. And it's like any other person for sure would have ran this girl over. And this video was trending around probably just in the community. I'm like, well, if more people saw this, you would know. You would have a hard time reacting that quickly. And like, it's just a branding problem. It's an image problem. We just need to show people, like, if you look at the math, it's way safer, and you need probably more video content like that to show it.
Okay, so let me tell you why it's not just a branding problem. And this is where it gets sort of interesting. There are 3 reasons, I think, based on our research, that autonomous vehicles are not popular. And I actually think that it is a near perfect bellwether for why a lot of AI systems will not be popular. And after I explain them, I'll extrapolate. The first reason is that we love control. Humans love control. And there is something visceral about getting in the car and putting your foot on the pedal and driving it. So much so that a lot of people talk about autonomous vehicles as being un-American. This is a very popular term. Even if they work really well, I want my car. And one of the reasons we came to this conclusion is we went and watched kids ride the Autopia ride at Disneyland, that little cement track where they, ride around in those little gas-powered go-karts. Disney's tried to shut down that ride for a long time. It's been around since 1954. It's in Tomorrowland, despite the fact that it's little gas-powered go-karts. It's basically a blight. It's embarrassing to them. And they can't because kids love it. It's, in fact, the most popular ride for kids ages 3 through 6 for the obvious reasons. They just want to control the vehicle. The second reason, and this goes to the point around branding, is that technological thresholds are moving way too fast. And so in a world where, when we started doing this research, by the way, a year and a half ago, autonomous vehicles were bad, I didn't actually care, right? My concern was not, are autonomous vehicles good or good? All I concerned myself with was the fact that they were polling at 25% approval relative to 50,000 people dying on the US roadways. 7,000, by the way, of them are children. So we have this terrible problem, this obvious solution. It's incredibly unpopular. And one of the things that's also true is that no one knows how good they are now because they've gotten so good so fast. And so in a world where, by the way, humans don't risk adjust at all, you talk about a branding thing, 20 times more Americans are afraid of flying than driving, despite one being empirically exceptionally safe and one being empirically exceptionally dangerous. And this is very sensitive, and so I want to tread very carefully. And first, I will offer condolences to anyone affected by the American Airlines flight that crashed. But when that plane was struck by the helicopter and went down, the day after, a bunch of people who know I travel basically for a living reached out and said, does this change your plans? How do you feel? And I go, listen, if I were to change my plans because of safety, it would be because I did not want to drive every day multiple hours with a stranger to and from airports. That is the risk to me. But we don't risk adjust. We just there is something about the sort of the unnatural act of flying that is terrifying for people. And then you multiply that with the fact that most people don't know that today in the US, in Phoenix, Arizona alone, 150,000 people will drive in an autonomous vehicle on the freeway without incident. So now we're at this place where it's just as technological thresholds move faster, people are like, I don't know. Can it do that thing? Who knows? And frankly, what it can do today pales in comparison to what it can do tomorrow. And we discovered this at OpenAI, right? People would be like, oh, it just can't do that thing. And so they weren't adopting the models. And then everyone was like, no, you're operating on, month-old news. It can do that thing now. I don't know, Steph, do you remember the radiology reports that were going around that, radiologists are, we thought radiologists were worse, but now we know that, now we know they're better. There was that whole debunking of the AI radiology. Yeah, that report was
maybe describe it though, just for people who don't know this though.
There was this whole trend around in the beginning when we first started doing effective, good imaging with large language models, GPT-4o, sort of early offset models. There was this question of, how far will these models go? And so people started wondering, can we read scans with these models? When we first started producing these models that could produce images and read images, we sort of went about trying to figure out, okay, how far will this go and how much can they do? And of course, everyone immediately sprinted at, how will this affect imaging? And could we automate the radiologist? And so they went about trying to train a model to read scans and then, compare the model to the report, to the performance of a radiologist. And the early results were very favorable in terms of the fact that the machine could do it. And then the comparison results showed that the radiologist was in fact better. And people saw this and people trumpeted it as this like victory for humans and defeat for machines. Like, good, we're all going to have jobs. I'm sitting here being like, do you know how many people on earth can't see a radiologist?
Yeah.
Do you know how many people would love to see, like, why are we so obsessed with a healthcare system? By the way, both my parents are doctors. Why are we so obsessed with a healthcare system that doesn't work for most people when in fact we should be trying to free ourselves from it? Now, I didn't have to wait long. Fast forward 4 months, the next generation of models vastly outperforms radiologists, and in fact does so on anomalies, which we used to say, these are reserved for the humans. The machine can't read the anomalies. Well, in fact, the machine can. Now, the problem is enough people have read that report, which was published in 2023, about how radiologists are better than the AI systems. And they come up to me and they go, well, what about this report? And I go, I'm so sorry to tell you this. That report is stale by a lot. And I'm sorry to tell you this, not because I'm, disappointed that AI isn't getting better. It's because it's so hard to keep up now. It is very hard for most people, including me, to know, is a machine actually not good at something, or we just, do I just need to wait a couple hours? But the third reason, Steph, and I think this is actually the thing that I've become like most fixated on, is that humans have no tolerance for machine failure and exceptional tolerance for human failure.
We've seen this with autonomous vehicles, for sure.
We are so willing to watch ourselves destroy each other on freeways. 1.3 million people globally die on the roadways every year. About 95% a result of human error. When a Tesla swerves into the wrong lane, people are like, shut the whole thing down. And so to describe it as a branding issue, I think is fair until you actually start to explore the fact that we are so willing to watch ourselves do catastrophic things outside, within the boundaries of non-malicious intent, which is this incredible thing. They meant well. It could have happened to anyone. But we cannot stand the thought of a machine, misbehaving in sort of any case. And you see this, here's where it gets really interesting. You see this when you start to see the polls on autonomous surgery centers or autonomous surgeons, because the error rate in American surgery is quite high.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't even get into it because I don't want to spook anyone who's about to go into surgery. But it's very high. And it's not because, they're bad people. It's because surgery's hard. Right. And it's not like, crazy high, but depending on the surgery, there's like a decent chance that, something goes wrong. When you present the idea that you could have a more successful outcome, probably with a machine, it doesn't actually give you any comfort, because the idea that the machine could break is actually the haunting thing. And this is where autonomous planes are going to come in. If I said, Steph, hey, we can fly an autonomous plane. By the way, pilots cost about 10% of commercial flights domestically and about 5% of commercial flights internationally. That's roughly the cost of a pilot. And they account for, I think, like 7% of all delays. So if I said, Steph, we could reduce your plane ticket internationally by 5%, and we could reduce your chance of delay about 7%, but there won't be any pilots, what would you say?
I would do it.
I would too. That's great.
Yeah.
Most people
We'd be the only two. Just be us.
Most people wouldn't. And quite honestly, you know what? Actually, I say that. I'm not even sure I would. I just don't know that
really?
There's a certain amount of redundancy that I love. Now, here's the crazy thing, Steph, as I say this, we also know, and this is where it gets, given the events of last week, pilots also cause error. We talk about wanting redundancy, maybe we don't. Anyway, this is all to say, what we are facing is not a crisis of technological thresholds anymore. For a long time in human history, we just didn't have stuff. Like we just like, we'd like, sorry, you're sick, you're gonna die. Like you have that infection, there's nothing we can do. Now we have a bunch of antibiotics. We discovered our first antibiotic, by the way, in 60 years because of AI very recently. Mm-hmm. That went under the radar. The problem is not going to be a technological threshold problem. It's going to be a societal threshold problem. The future is not determined by what machines can do. It's determined by what we want them to do. And it's going to be very hard to convince a lot of the population in this post-scarcity world that they should, improve their outcomes at some, risk of, even if very small, at some risk of machine failure. And also surrendering control. And I'm always reminded when I think about this that like the constituent that was most upset by this 1950s run on home appliances was the housewife, right? And she said, what am I going to do in a world where the dishwasher cleans my dishes and a vacuum, makes it easy to clean whatever. And there's a certain identity element to all this, which is like the identity displacement cost means that a lot of industries may not actually automate because the lobbying interests behind them are so strong. And this is another reason societal thresholds are just going to move slower. And if you want to know, people are always like, what jobs are going to automate first? And I go, find the weakest lobbies. Because it has nothing to do with whether the AI can do that person's job. I mean, assume that a lot of our jobs eventually are going to change. It has so much more to do with, is the institution going to allow that job to actually automate?
Yep. Yeah, what I'm hearing also through all of these threads is like this zero-sum thinking that occurs where it's like something comes out and it's like, oh, now it's going to take all the jobs, or like even just like, stuff with DeepSeek. Oh, well, there goes OpenAI. They're gone now. Like, and just like, it's just like this or that. There's no thinking of like, if you think about autonomous vehicles, like what if there's a bit of both? What if, yes, you can still have the control, same thing with planes. Like, yes, humans can, there's still somewhere there, like just to feel like there's still some humans in it. It doesn't always have to be like all or nothing from the start. And I think that's sometimes what I see with any of these things of like, well, no more doctors, don't need them anymore. Now cataracts can always just be identified with AI. Like who needs them? And it's like, doesn't feel like there's always a middle ground of like, well, maybe there's a place for all of it. It just might look different. Like maybe it's just going to feel different, look different. What do you think about that when it comes to like culture, society, like how to not be in a zero-sum game constantly?
There is so much there's just so much here that is entrenched in the human experience. Mm-hmm. We have been around a long time, somewhere between 1 million and 100,000 years, and we've sort of been organizing for, at least 50,000 years, if not more. Most of that journey, really until the last, 1,000 years, less, was spent wondering about like the, existential risk outside the cave. And it is very hard for us to even relate to our ancestors in any real way, right? We have more optionality than people 20 years ago by an order of, probably by an order of magnitude, right? Like you can just sort of do anything now if you have access to the internet and the means to sort of go somewhere. Thanks to Frontier and Spirit and low-cost international airlines, you can basically get around the world for a few $100s. It's impossible to understand what our ancestors went through to actually arrive us to the wiring that we are at, which is, an exceptional negativity and confirmation bias. We are keenly aware of the idea that in order for you to succeed, I must lose. Mm-hmm. And that plays itself out in all sorts of, housing policy decisions, right? I don't know about you, my parents, I'm sure we have parents from a similar ilk. Grew up talking, my parents are, liberal people who are like, hey, we don't want Santa Barbara to get too much bigger. Where do
And
you
mine are
want
the
people
opposite.
to?
Mine are conservative on the other side in Maryland.
There you go. And everyone's saying the exact same thing,
Yep, same thing.
which is
Yeah.
like, we just can't let our town change. We got to
Yeah.
our town and now it's right. And for it to change, it will come at some cost to me. And it's this like incredible departure from the path that got the world to this point, which was growth and opportunity and sort of net positive opportunity. It is so hard to rewire that. And in a world where people are staring at their own lot, right? So a lot of the performative stuff that you see in Hollywood is like, oh, we should solve all these problems, and the world is harmed, and we should make it better. And then Hollywood becomes the first group to stand up and say AI is destroying the world. The irony is so rich to me. You could write it. The story writes itself. Here's a group that spends most of their free time telling others about how the world is hurting and we need to help it. And along comes a technology that could democratize great education, that could provide access to exceptional healthcare, that could do all these things. And the first thing that the actors say is, what about me? What will it do to me? And then it became so personal. It wasn't just about protecting their jobs. It was about punishing the businesses, right? What Scarlett Johansson did to basically go after OpenAI. And I mean, again, I'm not privy to any of this, but like, they made it personal. They were like, we're going to get these companies. And I'm sitting here being like, if you actually believe all the things you're talking about, sure, I could understand a concern that, at some point you want to protect your avatar, and that seems reasonable. But shouldn't you also be celebrating for this technology to help us produce fusion energy and help us, do all these critical things that you're constantly talking about us needing to do? That is just not something that we are wired to be able to do today. It requires a lot of psilocybin, patience.
I was just going to say that, like, psychedelics actually, I think, are a big way to zoom out and see the bigger picture outside of yourself. I didn't want to go there, but you brought it up, so.
I know, psilocybin, patience, MDMA. I mean, all the things that give you an opportunity to say, you know what, I'm doing okay. And I'm doing okay because technology has put this world in a position where I no longer have to fear all the things that my ancestors feared. Right? The world is a very safe place now. And we need to start, championing the fact that we got here because we invented things and discovered new things that allowed us to do that. And if we actually want a better world for our kids, we should stop talking about how much worse the world is getting because of technology and start investing in the technologies that can actually get us there. Now, with that said, I think social media is a blight, but it's one of these like costs that comes with the internet. And people are like, oh, it's destroying the world. I'm like, look, if you had looked at the United States in 1950, you would assume we'd all be dead of alcohol poisoning by now. These things take a toll, and then there's a regression to the mean, and we keep moving forward.
So when thinking about the space that we're in now, because I love the optimistic view. That's also the side that I'm always on of like, oh my gosh, look at all these amazing things that are coming down the pike. And I have kids. I've got 4 of them under the age of 7. I also am like, woo, this is like an interesting world to parent kids into. And like, I do know screens.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a whole chaotic household over here. But it's also really exciting. And I love seeing like all the opportunities that are coming for them, all the spaciousness that they're going to get in a way that our ancestors, like you said, never had. And so I wonder, like, what does that future, do you think, what does it look like, knowing that, yes, a lot of jobs are going to change, going to go away. There's going to be a lot of efficiencies that are had. I see it right now with my own company when it comes to media and making content. I'm sure you do as well. So it's like you can see very quickly the world's already changed rapidly in the past couple of years. And so where it's headed, it's going to look very different. And so I always have the thought of like, what do we do with all the spaciousness that we're about to be feeling, that we're already maybe feeling in our own lives?
You're going to be a better than me at answering this in some way because you have, I admit I just got married. I don't have kids yet. And so it's harder for me to talk about what the life that your kids will live than it is. You should be the one to talk about that. But I'll tell you, let me give you my framework, which is when people tell me that they think the world is getting worse, or when, people will make jokes. Usually what happens is it's a very smart person who will say something like, oh, why doesn't an asteroid just hit us now?
Geez, who are you around? This person needs to get to getting.
Well, I think you'd be surprised how many people say these things. I mean,
I guess I just am not around any of them. I put myself in a bubble of optimism.
That's wonderful. Okay, imagine, I don't know, again.
Yeah, I'll imagine.
I'm apolitical. Imagine that Donald Trump loses the election. How many friends in Austin are like, this country is never going to recover? I don't know. I mean, it's just like,
yeah, yeah, maybe so.
I have a lot of friends on both sides of the aisle who insist that this is like a critical moment. And I'm like, I think we're more robust than that.
Yeah.
I've become fairly apolitical because my position at this point is like the greatest risk is simply that we stop remembering that we are just moving forward constantly. That we become so fixated on the things that are broken. And so when people tell me, they bemoan whatever, time we're in, I say, listen, if you believe the world is getting worse, then you have the onus. You have the responsibility to prove so, because the historical precedent for many centuries is quite the opposite. It is true that there are, it's not a perfect line up and to the right, although these days it's going to start to feel, I think, more logarithmic up and to the right. But I just can't, it is very hard for me to listen to people when they talk about, how bad things are going to get when I can only look at the world and appreciate how much better they are than they've ever been. Today is the best day ever to be born. And to argue otherwise is like really, really emotionally charged and sort of clearly missing the point. Then the question is, what is the sacrifice that your children will have to pay? And every generation forever has basically paid a sacrifice and given a gift to the next generation as a result. This is how the world works.
Yeah.
A sacrifice is paid, and the gift is almost always turning a luxury into a staple or a commodity. This is one of these, or many luxuries. This is one of these great privileges of being a human, is you get to pass to your children something that they will sort of take for granted that you considered very precious. It's one of the best parts of sort of being a child and one of the best parts of being a parent. And it happens at sort of on a microeconomic basis, and of course it happens on a macro basis. For the greatest generation did a lot. They passed peace to the next generation when all of the inventions that came with these wars. The question then is, what is your and my sacrifice going to be paid, and then what is the next one? And I think for us, what I am seeing is that there's going to be an incredible identity and emotional displacement, and that the great cost to us is not going to be economic. Job displacement is not going to drive a really intense economic upheaval. It's going to drive an exceptional emotional upheaval. Most people will be better economically on the back end of an AI revolution, of an AI industrial revolution. Cost of goods and services will decline. Most elite services like healthcare and education will sort of become effectively standard. But how will we manage the emotional whiplash of being like, I had this career and now I don't? And what should I do next? And I think our kids are going to see the world with so much curiosity and ideation, because they will have grown up watching us try to grab onto all of the things that we thought were, we could hold on to. And they're going to say, you know what? Yeah. One of the opportunities that I now have is to look at the world and say, maybe I won't have a career. Maybe I'm going to have this incredible journey of exploration in this new world of abundance, which I think is very, very plausible. And then, of course, what is their sacrifice? I don't know. Time will tell. But actually, if I had to pick, I would probably say it'll be a massive conflict between people and the state. My guess is in the next 100 years, we don't see a huge conflict between two states. I think we eventually see a huge conflict between people and the state. Once we all realize that the technology has driven us to a place of abundance, and it's actually now the state that's sort of restricting access to it.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. It's interesting when you talk about, like, when I think about us growing up, we were taught, asked at an early age, what are you going to be? What's your career going to be? And it's like, we were literally young. I remember being like age 6 and being like, what the hell? I don't know. I'm not sure, but I guess I got to figure it out. And I think I got probably into finance because of that. Like, because I had this molding from an early age of like, well, my dad was in finance and I should be in finance. And that's just what I did. But then I think about how I'm parenting my kids now. And it's more about like finding wholeness within themselves, like mindfulness, spirituality, belief in something bigger than yourself, working with your emotions and regulating them. And like, you can like a lot of things and never pushing them down any one path. It's like, we're going to do lots of things. And like, it's such a different world. And I'm also seeing that now with a shift in executives. So we talk to a lot of executives. We have a lot of different podcasts, a lot of C-suite folks. And the ones who are transitioning into different roles out of their old role, there's like a new opening for purpose that's different than ever before, that I'm like, they're looking for something bigger than themselves. And I'm like, is that where the world is maybe heading, of like exploring consciousness, spirituality, belief in something? It's like we got away from that for a while because we were being fulfilled by our houses and our cars and our careers and our everything. And when that goes away, if you don't have something that makes you whole internally, you might be seeking that, which makes me wonder like where people are headed to explore that in the future. And it might be a big shift.
I mean, one, it sounds like you're a great mom, and so your kids are very lucky. And two,
Thank you.
I totally agree. I mean, I just totally agree. I think that one of the luxuries today that will be a staple tomorrow is the pursuit of consciousness, right? Self-awareness, self-actualization. And it happens in very performative ways. Like if you go on Instagram, you see all these people that, all these gurus, but it also happens very quietly, and it's happening more and more where people are really spending time in meditation to sort of channel themselves and to think about who they are and what makes them happiest. And it's leading to sort of this, revitalization of a calmness that our generation certainly lost in the digital age. And I think it will become a commodity in the future. I really think in the future, in the same way that, the internet was a unfathomable luxury to our parents and is now a commodity to us, so too will sort of stillness, calmness, consciousness, true consciousness. So yeah, I mean, not to make it too spiritual. I do think though, and then the book that's coming out called that we have called The Next Renaissance talks about this, which is, I think it's going to lead not just to this shift in what we can advance scientifically, but it will lead to a shift in how we are thinking about ourselves and the world. It's not just about, AI is not just about, can we make this device faster, right? Can we send better emails? People are so fixated on this. And people are so, reductive when they talk about AI. And I'm like, listen, think about it as a way to just unmeter human intelligence and then allow us to do a bunch of other things that were previously spent intensely focusing on something that, by the way, probably didn't serve us at all. And so I think there will be massive breakthroughs in our understanding of so many political, socioeconomic thoughts, sociopolitical ideas, and then of course probably a new awakening in a spiritual way.
Yeah. No, I know you don't want to go too spiritual, but I'm also in Austin and I'm woo. And so I have to. So something that I found interesting. So I've had my company since 2017. It started in the Bay Area. Very different vibe when I was there. Very different focus. And the executives felt very different that we were featuring and interviewing. And now I'm working with these different executives on the side. And it's like these different spiritual gifts are coming online for people. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's like, it's a thing that's happening where all of a sudden certain psychic abilities, mediumship, able to work with their hands in different ways. And it's happening to people who are totally skeptical. I was a CTO for a lot of years. I was, a CMO for a lot of years. And I'm seeing these people having certain things happening to them. And I'm like, I think this is the future. I think people are having certain gifts coming online for them that we haven't had the space to utilize previously because we were doing so much doing. We had to be checking all the emails and doing all the things. And now when certain spaces are opening up, we're not worrying about getting water and food as much as we ever did before. We're not having to, get food and groceries and drive the same way. And so I just think it's allowing people, for whatever reason, there's a shift happening. And I directly see it with the people that I work with on the side. And so that's why I'm like interested in where this is going. And I love that you kind of talk about it a little bit in your book.
It's so interesting to hear you say that. And actually, it's even more interesting to try to measure my response. 3 years ago, I would have been like, well, no, I mean, I think 3 years ago, I would have been like, oh, that's nice, Steph. Yeah. Let me tell you my response to that, actually. I am more sure than ever that we know so little about what's going on.
Yeah.
And so where I'm at now is, my wife, if Hadley listens to this, she might not, who knows. But my wife, we got together and she asked me my zodiac sign. I said, I think I'm a Pisces. I don't know. I don't really care.
Oh, is that your zodiac sign?
Yeah, right? Isn't that what a zodiac is?
I'm trying to think.
Horoscope? Isn't horoscope your zodiac sign?
Yeah, that's like where it's like Aquarius, Taurus. Is that zodiac?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just making sure. I was like, that sounded weird at
first.
I
thought you were woo, Steph. What's going on?
I am, but that kind of shit I don't believe. That kind of stuff I don't let guide my life. Numerology, human design, that kind of stuff. Yes,
okay,
but
well, let me. Okay, so wow. Okay, so psychic abilities, yes, but horoscope, no. Is that right?
Yes, only because psychic abilities I've experienced myself, and that only started happening within the past couple of years with psychedelics, kind of turning that one on. And I've seen it with a lot of different people. Numerology is based off numbers, and that one is I only believe it because the certain people I've worked with have predicted certain things, like you're going to be in a lawsuit next year. This is going to happen. I'm like, whoa, okay, I don't know that one well enough, but people predicted certain things that are very hard to predict. But when someone just comes in and says like, you're a Taurus, I believe some pieces of it of like, yes, I am stubborn. Okay. Hard-headed. Sure. But then there's certain stuff where I'm like, I don't know. I think that could resonate for other people too. So that one is a little more murky for me. So yes, I'm woo, and I have certain cutoffs.
Well,
go on.
So let me tell you my position on all this, which is I don't actually care what any of it is. I think at this point, what's really funny, what's just as funny as insisting that numerology is right, is that insisting numerology is wrong.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm at a place now where I'm pretty willing to listen to anyone who is reasonable, well-spoken, considerate of how I might be interpreting the information they're providing with regard to, metaphysical ideas. Because I'm pretty certain that we know nothing.
Yep.
Very, very little. There's clearly an energy plane that we have not tapped into, or that we are tapping into, or that we are trying to reach, but like struggling to, we know that trees have memories now, like there's just a lot going on around us that we have not fully appreciated, and we are starting to. And far be it from me to tell you that your explanation for that energy, I'll just call it another plane of existence, that energy plane is wrong. That's where I'm at. And I'm pretty insistent on this. Like, I don't know that there is any idea that someone could bring to me about how something could work that I'd be like, that can't be right, because that's neglecting the fact that clearly a bunch of things are happening that we cannot explain, and pointing at, trust the science in this case is like, well, yeah, I think you're missing some pretty critical understandings of how, physiognomy works. Like, we cannot really explain why someone's nice when you see their face, but there's something real about that. And we've tried to, but there's anyway, we could go on here. I'm pretty willing at this point to just say, sure, it sounds interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. If more people were like that, I think it would open up more minds in all the different ways. And it always reminds me, I think, what Peter Thiel saying, strong opinions weakly held, that's exactly now how I approach everything in life. Because I feel like I was super smart when I was 15. And I was like, I knew everything. And then the older I got, I'm like, I actually don't know anything. And every year I'm like, whoa, more things I don't know. And so I think, just having an open mind. And I had someone come on the show where they were talking about AI turning into AGI, and it's going to become a human. And I was like, how could anything ever become a human if we don't know the human brain yet? We don't even understand it barely. We just understand pieces of it. So how could it ever become that if we don't understand it? It got us into a whole philosophical conversation. But
did having kids change how, your ideas of what you know and don't know?
For sure. Yeah. I think I continue every day to learn new things, and it shifts behaviors with our whole family because of that. I mean, I talk to so many smart people all the time. People are always sending me stuff. I'm also in a Austin community that's very health focused, very spiritual focused, very open-minded. People are constantly exploring stuff here that I haven't seen anywhere else. And it shifts a lot of things when it comes to parenting and how I think about the future and how I'm guiding them and like what they're allowed to express of just like, I think about emotions back in the day where my parents were like, totally like, turn that shit off. Do not have an explosive moment. And with my kids, I'm like, yes, what can we hit? Let's go find something. Like, let's get it out. It's just different. And that's only just from maybe what I learned 2 years ago. And so I'm constantly shifting things and things that I felt strongly on of like, especially around parenting of like, my parents were very strict like this and that was helpful. And I would justify why my parents' parenting style was exactly what I needed. And then when you have 4 kids in front of you, you're like, there's no way one parenting style will ever work for all 4 kids. They are also different, even though 2 of them are twins. I'm a twin. It doesn't work. Like you just have to constantly be adjusting and not hold strong to like any real beliefs too strongly, at least.
Did you have the twin second?
I had, yes, second. I first had Grayson and then I had the twins second. Yeah. It was a whole vibe.
One of my best friends just had, he has 4 daughters now. He had 2 daughters and then they got pregnant with twins. So they have 4 under the age of 4.
Wow.
Which
That's
is
intense.
Incredible. I don't know how to do it. They're quite good at it too.
I don't know. That's tough. I had 3 under 3 and that was enough. And at that point it was just me with them because I was divorced by the time my twins came. So that also created a whole different dynamic too of like, this is pure chaos. And it's the best having this many kids. Like they're their own little team, their own little squad, and I don't even have to watch them really.
Incredible.
No.
Good for you.
I want to shift into, for people who are currently working in a company, building a company. I mean, they are in the job space somehow. I'm sure you get asked this a lot of like, how do I think about my job? What should I be doing right now? If there's going to be all this time on my hands and my job might get automated, like how do I keep up in this market? What do you say to someone like that?
Obviously, it depends on who I'm talking to, and it depends on where they work and what seniority they are, so I wouldn't say one size fits all. But if I had to package an elevator pitch to someone who said, "Well, how do I think about my career, my job security? What should I do?" I would basically say the following. First, the world is going to get economically better. And there is just so much evidence to suggest this. It has done so for a while. So much of the world has come online into a middle class in the last 20 years. Obviously, I'm in China today. Most of China today experiences a world that they just could not have fathomed 20 years ago. And that trend is just going to continue because we're going to continue to figure out how to make the cost of goods and services less and less expensive. That being said, it's not clear that many of us will feel emotionally better during this process. And the reason for that is what we discussed earlier, which is in a world where your job changes frequently and a lot, the great cost to you will be the sense of identity that you lose, that you used to attach to a career or a job. To say nothing of sort of the whiplash that comes from things constantly changing. The millennials started, we're testing the waters, we're moving around. Gen Z is like, I'm going to do this today and this tomorrow. And they're more comfortable with that, certainly. And I think that's just going to become the new normal. That being said, those who will succeed more than others in this new world will clearly possess a couple characteristics. One, they are going to be exceptionally good at learning. Young people ask me all the time, by the way, what should I study in college? And what they're asking is, how do I make a bunch of money? Right? That's sort of how we've wired young people to think. And what I tell them, I have the same consistent, very disappointing answer, which is it doesn't matter. It does not matter. There is a fast declining correlation between your major and your economic outcome that sort of the world is now observing. And I think that's just going to continue. And I think it actually arrives at a place where it may not matter if anyone, if people go to a traditional higher education in 20 years. So what I tell people is go study something you love. Go become fascinated by something, explore novel concepts, debate people, change your mind, find the world's experts and consider what they're saying. And you can only do that with something that you're truly deeply fascinated by. The act of doing that will teach you how to become fascinated by other things, One of my great experiences in life that sort of set me up for this that no one knows about is I played volleyball competitively in high school and college, and then very briefly professionally, and coached at the University of Oklahoma, and actually married an elite volleyball player who
Ooh.
coached herself at UCSB. And one of the things that I talk about, that she and I talk about, is volleyball, among other things, taught us what it is like to truly try to accomplish something at an exceptionally high level, right? In a world where, neither, I mean, I tried the math Olympiad, and I was on College Jeopardy, but failed miserably. Tried to be sort of exceptional in these sort of academic pursuits, and then found this athletic pursuit that I could really be elite in. And it taught me what it was like to work exceptionally hard for something, and to be surrounded by other people who are great at that thing. And it gave me this sense of teamwork, but more than anything, it gave me an incredible sense for what working hard to pursue something in an elite way felt like. And that practice then teaches you for the rest of your life what it will feel like when you want to achieve something at a very high level. Studying the theory of something, requires hundreds or thousands of hours, and you only know that if you've actually mastered the theory of something. That's one. Learning how to learn. And I tell people, in a world where your skills and your knowledge will start to commoditize slowly and then quickly, a whole new array of opportunities are going to be presented to you, and you're going to be able to seize them if you know how to learn. Versus if you say, I'm a specialist in this thing, and I'm going to attach myself to it.
Yeah, which I think right now, the time frame we're in is like, it's a great time for people to try a lot, because I think you either have to reparent yourself, thinking once again how we grew up. I didn't try a bunch of things all the time. I mean, my parents didn't have money like that for me to try stuff all the time. So it's just like, stay focused, stay on the same path, get that major. But even now, like, one, as parents, how to make sure kids are just able to try a lot, because you don't know what's going to exist. How can they just explore a lot of things and be curious and stick with it and learn what's, not working and why they want to shift, and have good critical thinking for why. But then how do we reparent ourselves also to, like, I mean, at least for me, I know I could not figure out what my passion was. When someone asked me one time, I'm like, I work in finance. I work at Google. Like, I was such a robot, because I was like, I don't know. This is just, I've been on one path. I don't really have a bunch of passions going on. And so it's like a process of reparenting myself and other people probably in my generation of, like, it doesn't have to be one thing anymore. It can be a lot of things. The world can be a lot of things.
Well, I would say it differently. I would say it has to be a lot of things. I think the problem is in our generation, you had the choice. You could, become an accountant and spend your life making a great living as an accountant, or you could go explore a bunch of other things. I'm just not sure that the future holds a place for people who insist that they will do a thing for their entire life. In fact, I would bet against that almost certainly. And I think this is true for savants. I think that there are things that people are going to be exceptional at that will feel like a commodity at some point, especially when it comes to an intelligence computational concern. And so, learning how to learn, right? Learn how to learn. And by the way, the world's more fun that way. This is the other great thing. And this is why I wake up so happy every day. Because the next thing I'm about to tell you, in addition to learning how to learn, is actually one of the great unlocks to living a happier life, right? And so in addition to learning how to learn, the other quality or the other characteristic of people who succeed in the future are people who optimized for humanistic qualities. Because in a world where we are pursuing AGI, this idea of human intellectual equivalence, and in a world where societal thresholds move based on our willingness to adopt technology in a certain way, it's increasingly clear to me that humans will actually draw a line between what we want machines to do and what we don't at the emotional level. And that there is an exceptional amount we are going to let machines do computationally, and there's a ton that we're not going to want them to do emotionally. And I think this concern, are we going to marry machines, seems very improbable to me. And the reason for this is that we tried we've already run a controlled experiment pretty well. We ran the COVID experiment. We said, let's go virtual. Let's see what it's like if we just virtualize all of our work and lives and communities. And we hated it, right? I travel the world because of this. I mean, I could do all of these things that I do in the comfort of my own living room, it's not the same. It's not the world that we want to live in. And so in a world with Zoom and Skype and Riverside and name a technology, people still get on planes and fly 15 hours to meet someone face to face because the emotional connection matters. And so what I tell people is, and by the way, I have a lot of reasons for understanding this. And I'll actually, maybe I'll share one reason, because I used to look at this and say, this is definitely going to be true of brokers and salespeople, right? In a world where you and I, Stephanie, can basically know the same thing, we can type something into ChatGPT and become an expert in any given product. We're going to separate ourselves on a sales basis based on how kind, funny, or thoughtful we are. But then I had this incredible epiphany. My dad received a Lifetime Achievement Award about 4 months ago from the Breast Cancer Association of America. I went to his award ceremony, very eager to sort of celebrate this, brilliant man that I spent my life looking up to for his genius. And I sat down at this table and became immediately overwhelmed with emotion when I realized that, like, these people saw my dad, as a friend more than anything else. And it hit home so hard when one of his patients stood up on stage before he received the award and talked for 5 minutes about my dad. And for the first 30 seconds, she talked about her patient outcome, that she had survived breast cancer and gone on to live a fulfilling life, giving back to the community. For the next 4.5 minutes, she talked about how my dad made her feel.
Mm-hmm.
And
yep.
She described a process by which she got her diagnosis. She had met with 4 oncologists. They had all given her the same prognosis and the same treatment recommendation. Okay. There was no disagreement of what she needed to do. And then she said the thing that I will never forget, her words, genuinely not mine. She said, in a world where it became very clear that the treatment was prescribed, that the treatment was obvious, the bedside manner was no longer a feature, it was the product. And that to me was like the ultimate revelation, because I had always seen my dad as this amazing, brilliant man. And in fact, the community saw him as, and of course I love my dad for all of his amazing qualities, but the community saw him as a shepherd and a beacon of hope and inspiration. Mm-hmm. And this is just going to become increasingly true in the world. We're going to live in a world where machines can prescribe treatment plans better than doctors. And what we need in everywhere is courage and curiosity and wisdom and empathy and humor. And when kids are like, what should I get good at? I just start naming humanistic qualities until I get blue in the face and they sort of they're bored and walk away, right? It's performative at that point. I'm like, look, mm-hmm. get good at all the things machines aren't going to be good at. And even if they are, we're not going to care. And those are the two, when people are like, what should I do? I'm like, listen, learn how to learn and master the humanistic qualities. Mm-hmm. Eye contact, start with eye contact, right? People, give me a weak handshake and say, what should I do? And I'll say, just, I'm like, kid, shake my hand, right? Like yeah. I already sound like an old person talking to me when I was a kid, but it's going to matter so much more than we think right now.
Yep. I do see with that piece. I mean, I've personally gone through different emotional intelligence workshops and trainings that are all about like getting to the depth and like working through your traumas and like working with energy, like from what energy you're putting out and what you're feeling and how to like, how you want to be perceived and how people are perceiving you. And like this kind of work, I think will be very important, because I do think there's been many generations who have, at least generation behind screens, not focusing on that, focusing on what am I good at? I can be the best when it comes to Excel spreadsheets. I'm going to be recognized for that. And I actually love that we're moving into a world of like, how human are you? How's your community perceiving you? How are you showing up? How do you make people feel? And not just your words. Like words aren't actually really what matter. Like, when you get around someone and you trust them instantly. It's a feeling. You just feel someone's energy. It's not what they're saying or even how they're looking always. And so I'm really excited about this space of like, be more human, learn how to be human again.
Me too. And that actually leads me, I guess, where we can close this, which is, if I had to say one thing to everyone, it's that the world is going to get better because of AI, if for no other reason than because it's going to force us to be more human. And or rather it's going to deliver us to a place where we get to be. Because in a world where we build machines that are much smarter than us, we have the opportunity now to do the things that we actually deeply love doing, right? Which is caring for each other, being in physical community with friends and family, ideally outside, it turns out is the thing that everyone optimizes their life for. Like that is everyone's happiness function. It doesn't matter how much money you have. Your goal is to get outside with friends and family as much as possible. And most people work their whole lives to go on, to go in retirement and have a few vacations where they get to taste that. And I think that's not going to be a luxury for much longer. It's going to become a commodity.
Yeah. Well, that's an amazing spot to wrap this up. Zack, thank you so much for coming on the show, spending time with me, giving me your humanness. I loved all of it. Where can people find out more about you and your work and what you're up to?
Well, I'll let you put the link in, but zackkass.com, there are all sorts of links about me now. But if you go to zackkass.com, it tells you about our book, about the work I'm doing at UVA, the advisory work we do, and of course, if you're interested, the speaking work we do.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me, Steph.